What's up, Crossfire youth? This is Pastor Caleb, here to welcome you to Crossfire tonight. And I'm so excited for what God is going to do in and through this time of message and the worship together with Molly. And as we engage together, I want to encourage you with this word. I was in St. John a couple weeks ago, and my cousin was putting together this puzzle, and it was this 3,000 piece puzzle. It was absolutely massive. And when I looked at it, I got intimidated, and I actually just went and sat on the couch and chose not to work on it at all. So she worked on it the whole time and got it done with the help of a couple other people. But what I saw her doing was she would take a couple pieces, and the puzzle was a lot of different patterns, so a lot of the pieces looked the same. So there was an aspect to it where she was seeing a lot of the same pattern, a lot of the same colors, and was wondering, which piece went in which place. So she would constantly look back to the box as a frame of reference and look and say, oh, this piece goes here. Classic, everyone does that when they do a puzzle. And what I thought was interesting, with that big of a puzzle, it can get really monotonous, you can get discouraged, and when you've got one piece that doesn't necessarily fit in a certain spot, and you only see that piece, it can get very discouraging over the long haul. And throughout this COVID-19 time, I am encouraged to know that God sees the box, and that He sees everything that we are going through right now in the big picture. He's outside of time, He is sovereign, and He sees it all. And so throughout this time, I want to encourage you and say that God has got you. He has a bigger perspective than we see right now. We only see part of the puzzle where He sees everything. He sees the box. And so I want to encourage you with that tonight. And as we go into this time, let's worship Jesus. Let's get closer to Him tonight. And I hope and pray that you continue to walk into who God has called you to be. So let's have a good time.
I love you, Lord, and all your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful.
is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Throughout this time, one of the things that I'm realizing more and more in our culture is that we live in a selfie culture. Now, what I mean by that is essentially you see all kinds of people on the internet and they're taking selfies of themselves and they're posting them. And some of them have blown up, some of them are really funny. Sometimes you get people in the background that weren't expecting to be in the photo, but they ended up in it anyway. And truth is, there's a lot of different selfies out there that are on TikTok or on Instagram or on Facebook. And the thing that I'm realizing more and more is that we live in a culture that emphasizes the self. We live in a culture that a lot of people are seeking after love in all the wrong places. And when it comes to selfies, that's just a simple example of the way that our culture is shaped by looking at one person. And so pop culture is famous for this, where you see one person who is beautiful and has all the right things going on for them, and we post ourselves up against that person and try to be like them. And we strive to be like them because they've obviously achieved success and they've obviously achieved all kinds of love from other people, and they've achieved likes on Facebook and Instagram, so that's what we try to achieve as well. And the reality is that we are radically broken, and that we desire on a very, very deep level to be loved and to be known. We look for relationship through social media. Maybe it's not social media for you. Maybe it's relationships with people. Maybe it's your relationship with your brother or your sister or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a best friend. The examples can go on. But the reality is that we live in a culture that radically emphasizes the importance of the individual. And we look for love for ourselves, and we look for it from people that cannot supply it through the long term. We're going to talk about someone tonight that realized that they can actually experience a life of fulfillment and of love that doesn't have to come from people's approval, but can actually come from a fulfilling relationship with Jesus. And so if you're familiar with John 4, we're going to turn there and you can read along with me, but I'm going to tell the story of the Samaritan woman. And if you're not familiar, the Samaritan woman was a woman that had been caught 5 different times with 5 different men, and essentially had 5 different husbands throughout her life. And so the Samaritans and the Jews, they wouldn't have been talking a whole lot in that day and age. And so the Samaritans would have actually avoided the Jewish people at all cost. And Jesus was a Jew in that time, and we meet the Samaritan woman and Jesus at the well. And there's this well that the Samaritan woman is coming to get her water jars filled up, And Jesus is there, and he's tired from a long journey, and he sent his disciples on ahead into the village to look for some food. And in this moment, Jesus is asking for water, and you can imagine the hot day that it is in Samaria, and this Samaritan woman who assumes that this man, doesn't know who this man is a Jew. And she's shocked about the fact that he would even say anything to her, let alone a woman. And in that day and age, in the culture, it was scandalous for a man to talk to a woman alone like that. And Jesus, being God, he's not a respecter of persons. He asks this woman for a drink. And confused and trying to figure out what's going on, the woman reluctantly is trying to push the conversation in a different direction. And we see their interaction kind of go back and forth. And what we see happen is Jesus call her out on her sin and the way that she's been living. And what's interesting about this story is the fact that this Samaritan woman was actually going in the afternoon to the well, where most of the women, the Samaritan woman at that time, would have been going in the morning. And the reason why they went in the morning is because they had different tasks and different chores that they would have had to be doing throughout the day. And so with that, there was an aspect where they were starting their day early and they were going to get things done at the well so that they could come back and start their day strong. Now, this woman was shamed in that culture because of the 5 people that she had lived with in that time. And she was known as probably a promiscuous woman. And so she didn't want to interact with those women. She didn't want to hear the gossip about what was going on behind the scenes. And so she chose to go in the afternoon. And Jesus, what we see him say is so profound. And if you turn to John 4, verses 16. We'll start there and we'll read through verse 18. So if you have it, I'm going to read it. Go and get your husband, Jesus told her. So he's calling her out and say, hey, go get your husband. He's kind of playing dumb a little bit. And then the woman says, I don't have a husband, the woman replied. And then Jesus, this is so good. Jesus said, you're right. You don't have a husband. For you have had 5 husbands and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. So Jesus, he calls her out. He calls this woman out and says, yeah, you're telling the truth because you've actually had 5 people live with you. And thank you for telling the truth, but I know you. I know who you are. I know what you've done. And this woman who's trying to avoid being seen by people in her community and in her town of Samaria, she's greeted by this Jewish man who she is expecting to not get a whole lot from anyway because of the Jewish and Samaritan relationship to begin with. And what happens is she's met with grace. She's met by this radical love, by this person she doesn't even know. And he calls out the thing in her life that she's trying to hide the most. What's profound about this is that she has been looking for all this time throughout her history. Maybe she was abused as a child. Maybe she has learned throughout her history and her life that she can't trust people. And she was looking for love through men and through different husbands throughout her existence in Samaria. And throughout this whole experience, she is looking for love. She's looking for love in all the wrong places. And what Jesus does right here is he says, I see you and I love you even in the midst of your mess. Even in the midst of everything that you've done to deserve the penalty that you think you deserve. I'm telling you that I love you. And I'm telling you that I am offering a better way to live than going to the well in the afternoon and feeling shame and guilt and sorrow over things that you've done in the past. And I'm calling you to something different. And so as we read on, as we continue to see this passage kind of play out, we see that the disciples come back and they're shocked that Jesus is actually talking to this woman at all. And the woman leaves joyful. She actually leaves her water jars there because she's so happy about the fact that someone has seen her and loves her and doesn't want her to live in the place that she's been before. She's overjoyed. She goes back to Samaria. She starts talking about it to everybody and telling people that this is a man who called me out on the things that I've done in my past. And I'm telling you right now that Jesus is offering that same invitation to you today. Whatever well that you've been going back to, whatever well that you keep on reaching in and hoping that there might be something there at the bottom that you can grab a hold of, and it's coming up dry every time, but you keep going back because that's the only way that you know how to do things, and you keep going back to that well, and you keep going back to that well, and you keep going back to that well, and it's not satisfying. I'm here to tell you that Jesus is offering a well that is deeper, that is eternal, that has everything that you need, that has a relationship with a God who loves you, that created every other thing that we try to hook ourselves onto in this life, and that he is the only one that has the capacity to show you the love that you need. At our deepest level, we need relationship, and we search for it in the wrong things. But I'm telling you right now that Jesus has the capacity to love you the way that you were designed to be loved. And so I don't know where you're at tonight. I don't know where you sit. I don't know where you stand. But Jesus loves you. And if you're like that woman in this story, and you keep going back to social media, you keep going back to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you keep going back to Netflix, or you keep going back to that relationship that is toxic and that keeps you back and thinking about the fact that you've done all these horrible things, or you keep going back to the internet, to that site that you know you shouldn't be looking at, or you keep going back to that toxic person that you know is really not good for you, but you continue to go back because you think that that person is going to satisfy you in the long run. I'm here to tell you they won't. Jesus is the only person that can satisfy that longing in your heart to be loved and known and fulfilled. Jesus has the capacity to love you the way that you were designed to be loved.